Well, hello everybody and welcome to the channel. This is David Bianco. Today's vinyl shootout is going to take an audio excursion back to 1982. But what's most relevant about this one is what triggered the reason for doing a vinyl shootout. It wasn't the release of a new high-end version of the record. Rather, it was actually a release of one that was quite economical and made me go back and compare it to previous versions that I had. And I think you'll find the outcome is a little surprising. That's coming up next here on our Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Today's video is going to take a bit of a twist because usually my vinyl shootouts or my comparisons involve higher dollar releases or reissues or remasters of previously released material that are in the higher price range, $50, $60, $100, $150. And of course, not everyone can go there, so to speak, and I get that. Neither can I. But when I do, I try to share what I know about them so that you make the best investment decisions as well. Now, there are also great records that are released that come out which are not in that price range, but they're not always known as much, or they're fewer and farther between actually. But when there's a really good one, I think it's time to make everybody aware of it. And of course, where this came from for me was back when I realized there were these releases coming out called RSD Essentials. Now, this was a basic spin-off of Record Store Day. And as I recall, this really had to do with the fact that they couldn't get out all of the releases that they needed to during the pandemic because of production restrictions. And so they created this series of certain records that they called essential, and they tagged them in such a way, like this one. And so this is the first one I got, called Heart-Shaped World by Chris Isaak. And this has that haunting song called Wicked Game on it. Well, when I got this record and I played it, I was flabbergasted, meaning blown away by the fact that this sounded exactly like a high-end audiophile record. I mean, it was like the music and the singer were in the room, and it had so much depth and richness to it. And so I've heard many of the RSD Essential titles are that way. And if you go to their website at www.rsdessentials.com, you'll find a list of previous releases and future releases, and you can even make a request of what you think a release might be. So this is really cool, and it's been a little bit under the radar in my opinion. But, you know, maybe all of them didn't sound as great as this one. And I will just say, I never had a Chris Isaak album before. I had heard Wicked Game, and I loved the song. And I heard this was a decent pressing. Well, it's more than decent. It's fabulous. And so, what does this have to do with today's shootout? Because I'm not doing a shootout of Chris Isaak. Well, I had seen, maybe last year I would say, I had seen that they had released through RSD Essentials Toto IV, which is one of my favorite albums. But honestly, I had never seen it in the stores. And so it kind of came and went in my mind. And I happened to be in a local record store here about a little over a month ago with one of my buddies from the VC and ran across this on the rack. And I said, whoa, there's that RSD Essential of Toto IV. And it was $26.99. So with tax, still under $30. And it's a red vinyl, which doesn't really matter to me, but it was red vinyl, but I had to get it because I had realized this was, in fact, mastered by Chris Bellman. And I thought, wow, it's probably pretty good if Chris Bellman's involved. And so basically what I did is I got it home and I said, well, geez, I think I have some other pressings of this. I knew I had an original, which was a Doug Sax mastered, and it's at the Mastering Lab. It has the stamp TML-M for the Mastering Lab, and it was a pressing from Columbia in, I think it's in Georgia, their pressing plant there, and it basically was one that I've had since it came out. I also had a CBS half-speed master that I remembered buying when these came out. Okay, and this was at the time $13.99, which was about $5 or $6 more expensive than the standard release. Now, these CBS half-speed masters have a digital step in them, and they say that clearly in their promotional material they put inside the record. So that was the early age of a digital creeping in. And I also had a Speaker's Corner version, but I had never opened it, and I didn't realize that until I went and looked, and I said, gee, I remembered buying it. I think I actually bought it in Germany on one of my trips to the EU. And so I said, well, this maybe would make an interesting shootout to go through these 4 versions, the RSD Essential new one, the original Doug Sax mastered at the Mastering Lab, the CBS half-speed master, and of course the new one, which I got, Chris Bellman RSD Essentials. And so I did that. And the outcome was very interesting. Now, let's just go through this at a macro level. A couple of these pressings sounded fairly close to one another, and that would be the original and the RSD Essentials sounded the closest. And then the Speaker's Corner and the CBS Half Speed were different. Let's put it that way. They had a little bit different sound to them. And as this album has such great hits on it, and I don't know if you remember the story of Toto as a group, they formed in the late 70s. They were a band that was basically a studio band of guys that got together in LA. You had guitarist Steve Lukather, you had keyboardist David Paich, you had the Porcaro brothers, Jeff and Steve, Jeff on drums, Steve on keyboards, then Mike on bass. But when the band got together for their first LP, they had brought on bassist David Hungate. Mike didn't really play on the first records, and they added Bobby Kimball for vocals. And when they released their first LP in '78, the self-titled Toto, it was a pretty big hit. Had a couple of 45s that made it into top 10, Hold the Line and I'll Supply the Love. But the next 2 albums by Toto, which were Hydra and Turn Back. Yeah, Hydra and Turn Back, they didn't do very well. So Columbia was like, hey, if you all don't come up with something strong in your 4th record, you're not going to have a contract. And so that put Toto into motion to work on their 4th album, which they called Toto IV, and released on March 26, 1982. Well, this album had a first released single of Rosanna, and that single release hit number 2, and it stayed there for 5 weeks. It never made it to number 1, but it sat at number 2 for 5 weeks. And this album actually earned 6 Grammy nominations, of which they won 3. They won Record of the Year, they won Album of the Year, and the group Toto won Producer of the Year. So 3 of the top acclamations from the Grammys was given to this album. The other singles that came out, the second one was Africa, which did hit number 1. It was their only number 1 song. And then they came out with Make Believe, which hit number 30. And the last one was the ballad I Won't Hold You Back, which crept into the top 10 at number 10. And so this was really their peak album, the album that did the best for them. And it's really got a lot of variation of songs in it. You know, Toto was kind of a not well-loved or respected band. I mean, Rolling Stone had written an article about them and brutally described them as prose with no poetry. So they weren't exactly on the Rolling Stone magazine's top band lists. And so this album was really the pinnacle for them and did the strongest. So when we look at these releases, we know the OG is Doug Sax at the Mastering Lab, and it is great. It's fabulous. It really is strong. And when you compare it to the CBS half-speed master, you lose something. And unfortunately, even the Speaker's Corner has gaps there to where it isn't as impactful as the OG. And in some areas, not maybe even as strong as the half-speed, but it definitely isn't what it needs to be compared to the original. So the question then is, well, okay, I can try to pick up a clean original, and you probably can for, 10, 15, 20 bucks, depending on the condition. You want to make sure it has that TML stamp for the Mastering Lab on both sides so that you get the best possible version of it. But then we have this RSD version that is out there. And so we're going to look at what the numbers are and how it performed against the others using my rating system. So before we get started, I'd like to just remind you of the equipment that I use for my shootouts. I've got a couple of Fluence RT81 turntables, and they've got the Audio-Technica AT540 ML cartridges on them. I also have for Phono Stage the Gordon Slee SE2 or Special Edition 2 Phono Stage. And that is switched back and forth between each turntable so I can quickly compare what I'm playing back to back, side by side at the same time, basically. Those are going through an NAD 3140 in integrated power amplifier and playing through Polk Audio RTA 11T speakers. And when I do my listening on headphones, which I do for comparison's sake as well, I use my Sony MDR-V6 headphones, which I've had for a while and really are a great studio standard that I enjoy. So, you know what my basic overlay is here. I pick up on the vinyl quietness as a category, the amount of strength of bass and the quality of the mid-range, the quality of the treble. I then look at how open or airy the imaging of the sound is, and I give those ratings of 1 to 10, and then I take all those, add them up, divide by 5, because there's 5 categories, and I come up with an overall average. And again, I'm comparing my original first pressing to the CBS half-speed remaster, to the Speaker Corners 2007, which was pressed by Palace, and then finally the newest RSD Essential from 2022 on Red Swirl. So let's see how the rankings are. When it comes to vinyl quietness, they all got a 9 except for the newer one actually had a little bit more noise on my copy. Now another person I know has a copy and said theirs was pretty much dead quiet. So it's again my situation. But overall, most of these were fairly quiet. Next, we go looking at the bass impact from these pressings. And what we found there is quite simply that there's quite a bit of difference. The first press is very strong, 9.5 out of 10. Very strong, impactful bass, and there where you need it and where you want it. The CBS half-speed was lacking in that area, as was the Speaker's Corner. They both ranked in the 8s as opposed to up in the upper echelon toward 9 and 10. And the new one, the RSD Essential, was a 10. It was really solid. It even had more oomph than the actual original, which was very, very strong at the time when I listened to it. But the new one beat it, and it was just really a good gut punch. You could really feel it. Especially on headphones, you could tell that impactful difference. When I had things on my speakers, the amount of vibration was greater with the RSD Essentials. So really strong in that. Got to the mid-range, we had a similar type thing. I mean, this RSD Essential just really drew out the voices, as did the OG, very strong, whereas the half-speed master by CBS and the Speaker's Corner were lacking some there. Definitely strong on the OG and even a little stronger on the new release or the RSD Essential. And basically ditto for treble. Again, the OG, very, very strong, very good off of that Doug Sax mastering. But somehow this Chris Bellman 2022 RSD Essential just had just a little more there. And it really was a sweet experience to know that you paid basically under $30 for an album with that kind of impact. And then the openness, again, higher marks for the original than the Speaker's Corner and the half-speed master by CBS. But then again, now the RSD, again, really just brought things up a notch. This record really was blew me away. I was really, really surprised. And I verified this with someone else who procured the record not too far after the time I got mine, and we kind of compare notes after we had listened to them. So overall, the original got a 9.3, the CBS half-speed an 8.2, the Speaker's Corner an 8.5, which was a little disappointing there. And then the RSD Essential was 9.6. You know, my buddy that got the one that didn't have very much vinyl noise, his would have been probably closer to it, obviously a 10, because he said his was very, very quiet. But the only thing that held mine down at all was a little bit of that. But man, as far as the music goes, as far as the vocals go, and the impact of this, comparing it, man, the OG and this one were fighting it out. But every time when I really listened to certain sections where there was really profound impacts, like on Rosanna, some of the beats in Africa, I Won't Hold You Back, that ballad, some of that airy sound that's in that ballad was really, really engrossing in a good way, meaning consuming with the RSD Essential. So if you love this album and you can pick that one up, I'd say do it, because it's now going to be my go-to copy. I don't need any of the others because it just really is that impactful. And that is great to see on a record that just about anybody can afford. And it's a brand new record. No guessing about how much the previous version in an OG had been played, trying to find a sweet copy of that. So try to find a copy of this RSD Essential if you can, because it's really worth the experience. So I hope you enjoyed getting exposed to this particular Shootout, but more importantly, rsdessentials.com. Go on there. Look at what's coming. Look at what's already been provided over the years, the last several years. You can buy some of those directly on there. And again, you can make a request for something that you think would be right for an RSD Essential release. Really cool stuff. So as always, thanks for watching. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so by pressing on the bell. And any particular time you hit a like or a thumbs up, that helps my algorithm. And comments are always welcome. So as always, I thank you for watching and appreciate the fact that you've taken the time. And I look forward to coming back to you next time on our next Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.